This week on the Q Division podcast,
we open the case of the 1954 TV adaptation of Casino Royale.
An American James Bond.
Why doesn't anyone have chemistry?
And who is our favorite little freak this week?
All that and more on the Q Division. Hello, agents. Welcome back to the Q Division, a James Bond movie marathon. I am one of your hosts, Gavin, and I've seen all the James Bond movies.
And I'm your other host, Chelsea, and I have seen one TV special and maybe random clips throughout life.
That's true, because tonight is our very first episode, and we are talking not about one of the James Bond films, technically. We're talking about an episode of the TV show Climax from 1954, which was an adaptation of the first James Bond novel, Casino Royale.
And what a name for that TV show, Climax!
Climax.
Exclamation point.
Yeah, that's the thing, is you really gotta say it like very excited, like Climax.
It tickles me every time. It's probably the most entertaining part of this whole experience.
Oh boy, is it? Yeah, this first of all, I have to say I'm so happy that you've joined me for this, and I'm so sorry that we're starting here, but listen, I take the advice of The Sound of Music whenever I can, which is let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start, and I think this is maybe gonna give you an idea of how James Bond shouldn't be adapted.
Yeah, we are Hilary Duff going back to the beginning, and boy, oh boy, did they make some choices for this first televised live adaptation. And I love classic TV. I've got old Betty White Life with Elizabeth on DVD. I love all that live 1950s TV. That's how most soap operas were done. But boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
I have some notes for this. They're going to go back in time and fix this.
Before we get into it, I just have to say, just getting into our personal lives, this episode's not going to come out till much later, but I do want to say happy birthday to you, Chels, because you just turned a lovely, 22? We're
going to go with 22. Spiritually, I am 185.
Yeah.
In actuality, I don't do math anymore. I'm too pretty for that.
Yeah, well, of course. Why would you? I was recently asked if I remembered being 35, and I was just like, it was 4 billion years ago. I have no idea what that was like.
No, there's been pandemoniums since.
Exactly.
Every day is a new week in the United States.
Oh my God, every day is a new week in the United States. Oh boy. Hopefully, when this episode airs, we will find ourselves in better straits, but not straits. But
definitely not straight.
But, better places. But you never know. It truly is. It's day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute.
And
here.
We felt every minute of it, just like we felt
God.
Every minute of this TV episode.
Did we? Okay, we're going to go back and we're going to give just a small little history of Casino Royale. I did mention that it was the very first James Bond novel that was written by Ian Fleming. And essentially, Ian, I can call him Ian, we're good friends, so of course. Yeah. He was essentially really trying to get people interested in adapting this. And it just seemed like every time that he would get there, it would just fall through. It just was never going to work as a film. People really just didn't think it had the legs for film at the time. And instead, CBS comes to Ian Fleming and they're like, hey, why don't we take your novel and why don't we make a live TV play out of it, essentially. And Ian Fleming thinks to himself, great, finally somebody's interested. And he gets paid $1,000. $1,000 to give away the rights to Casino Royale for adjustment in 2023, just a year ago. That would be $11,346. And
this is why the WGA went on strike last year. This is why, because wow, this is no money.
Exactly. And listen, I understand maybe he needed it, but oh boy. That's a rough amount of money. They did hope to eventually sort of adapt James Bond later into a TV show. 4 years later, they come back to Ian Fleming and they're like, we're going to make a TV show out of this. They gave him 32 episodes to write, in which he did over a 2-year period of entire TV show starring the James Bond character. He agreed to write the outlines, and then nothing comes of the show at all. So what Fleming does is he takes 3 of those outlines, turns them into short stories, and puts them into the 1960 anthology For Your Eyes Only, along with 2 additional short stories. Because, baby, he's going to get paid. He's going to get paid for that work. But I want to talk specifically about this adaptation. It aired on October 21st, 1954. It was live on television, starring Barry Nelson as Secret Agent James Bond, who is often called Jimmy Bond by many of the characters within the film. Peter Lorre and as the antagonist, Le Chiffre. And the show itself was hosted by William Lundigan, who basically is just there to give like the sort of Rod Serling intro. The show was long forgotten until 1981 when a film historian, Jim Schoenberger, discovered a kinescope of it. For those of you in the audience who don't know what a kinescope is, oftentimes it was used as a way to sort of preserve TV shows for brief reruns or just archival purposes. It was not the best way to go about things. And so essentially a kinescope it's also known as telerecording in Britain. And it's literally them pointing a motion picture film camera at a video screen or monitor or TV essentially. And it's synchronized to the monitor's scanning rate. So you don't get that interference, but you do get kind of a blown out, glossy look to everything. The other funny thing is this was broadcast in color in 1954, and no color recording of it survives because the only thing is the kinescope, which was done in black and white. So that's the version that most people see. As I mentioned in the previous episode, if you want to play along at the home game, you're more than welcome to go watch this film. It is for free on YouTube in a not great copy. I believe there's a slightly restored version that is on the Casino Royale DVD, as you mentioned in the last episode, Chels.
Yes, I did. And I kind of compared it. Like I brought up the YouTube version and the DVD version. Hardly any better. Hardly. But like, that's what you get when you're literally, gang, imagine just pointing a VHS recorder at the TV and that's all you got.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do anything with it, really.
It's funny, just a tiny bit of TV history that doesn't really have to do with James Bond. Essentially, Lucy... I Love Lucy sort of invents the like non-kinescope version because they didn't do their show live. They did their show taped to film and then would edit those episodes and put them out. And that way they own the masters and could make money off of the repeats. And once that happened, the studios caught on and were like, oh, we should be doing less live things so we have an actual archival and we can do these straight to film episodes that we then own and can make money off of in the repeats.
Lucille Ball, really, like, I used to teach a little TV history, but her name is all over it if you want to talk about just not only what was made, like creating the format, but also just business. She was such a shrewd businesswoman, and that's why I love her. So, again, if it wasn't for Lucille Ball, where's syndication TV at?
Absolutely. I mean, truly, truly a brilliant woman. And I mean, you know, I love Star Trek. Recognize the brilliance of Star Trek right away. Like, yeah, there's so much TV history that wouldn't exist, especially in America, without Lucille Ball.
Oh, yeah.
So to get into the episode, as I mentioned, it's October. It's 1954. You're gathering your nuclear family around. It's you and you're a straight white man and your wife, who is a straight white woman, and your 2.5 children, which, you know, of course, is a boy and a girl and a dog. And you're gathering around the TV to watch the broadcast of Casino Royale. Chels, just before I even really get into the description of it, what did you think you were getting into when you sat down to watch this versus what was your immediate reaction to realizing that was whatever you were thinking was not what you were getting?
So, like, I'm used to watching television like this. My stepdad is that person who watches, like, the old TV shows like Gunsmoke and The Fugitive and, like, Have Gun Will Travel. That's kind of what I was expecting, just like that format. Because, like, again, people have probably seen the film The Fugitive. The TV show was literally like episode of the week. They're just traveling around doing their thing. So I kind of expected something like that. And like even for when I was on mixed reviews for Audrey Hepburn, I watched her little, basically little special 1 hour live TV thing. And I cannot believe that that is more interesting than this, which should be fun and on paper sounds like a great idea. But wow, I had to watch this twice because I noted after the first time, I'm like, nothing stuck in my brain, like about any of the plot, the characters, anything. There was a few little frames that were fun to see, but overall, you could tell that they were still figuring out television because there's like no music to this.
Yeah.
It's it's pretty dry. You can tell it's live because Mr. Jimmy himself fumbles his lines a lot. And you're like, oh man, we really should have got some like maybe some Broadway actors on this one.
It's funny too because I believe there's a story of behind the scenes. Barry Nelson was really nervous, and Peter Lorre basically had to be like, "Hey, you need to get your lines right because I have to deliver the lines after those. So like, I need to know what's going on." So it does seem like maybe Barry Nelson was perhaps not ready for this sort of television.
He's not ready for prime time,
No,
y'all.
not at all. So yeah, we are treated with an opening narration for this episode of Climax that is essentially laying out the rules of Baccarat, which is the type of poker that does take place in this teleplay, I guess. And that's maybe one of the most exciting things in the episode. Like, it really sets you up for some excitement. Then you're instantly brought to the outside of the Casino Royale. James Bond is entering the Casino Royale, and lo and behold, someone tries to murder him. He deftly dodges behind a tree, question mark? And the tree is littered with bullets, and no one reacts.
Not nary a soul blinks at
No.
like a supposed assassin coming for Mr. Jimmy Bond here. I'm not calling
Exactly.
him his proper name. He is no James Bond here. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it was a choice. Like, I understand, like, in 1954, this would have been shocking, like, the violence of it all, because again, it's very new. They don't even have, like, these people have not seen the war because there's no television yet. They had the technology for it, but the war stopped it all. But this is kind of wild that an assassin could be so boring.
Yes.
Like,
And I thought that too, of the fact that, like, is this such commonplace occurrence that no, like, literally nobody's even like, hey, are you okay? Like, is that, and also it really does wonders for him, like, try to pass himself off as just a normal person entering the casino. And it's just like, oh yeah, no, you're just a normal guy who normally gets shot at from cars.
everyone does, just the time.
He goes into the casino and he immediately runs into who we are to discover is Clarence Leiter. Clarence Leiter will be filling in the role of Felix Leiter from the book. Why they thought Clarence was a better name, I guess they probably thought it sounded more British, because what you're about to find out is James Bond is not a British Secret Service agent. He is, in fact, an American who's working for the Combined Intelligence Agency. Did people just not know what the CIA was called back then?
They did not at all. And I like that it's just like, he is very much like, he does blend in, Mr. Jimmy Bond. He looks like corn-fed America right there.
Yeah.
He does not have any British suave charm, anything.
I need to know what the idea behind his haircut was. Because it looks like a flat top. Like,
I just don't even know what they were thinking casting him, because you expect, like, even in movies, like Cary Grant is playing American, but he is just like so charming. The most random person. Think like even John Garfield of the time, so charming in the 40s, and he looks like an everyman. This guy had like, he was a charisma vacuum.
Yeah. As I put in the notes for the kids out there, Barry Nelson has no Riz. So
No Riz.
none whatsoever. See, I'm cool, I'm hip, no cap.
Yeah.
Um by the time this episode comes out, nobody will even know what any of that means.
Nope.
I did enjoy, and I think the most maybe James Bondy moment, or what we will come to know as James Bond, occurs very early when Clarence Leiter meets Jimmy Bond for the first time, and he says, "Say, aren't you the fellow who was shot?"
Aren't you the fellow who was shot? No, I'm the fellow who was missed.
But once again, because as you just mentioned, that he really has he's like a charisma suck. It doesn't come off like suave or cool. It's just like, okay,
It's
great.
coming off as SNL cue cards.
Yes, absolutely. So Clarence sits down with Bond, and Bond, quote, teaches him how to play Baccarat. And basically what's happening is Clarence is there to inform Bond that Le Chiffre is there, and they need Le Chiffre, who is a Soviet agent, to lose his money because he's a money man for the Soviet Union, and he's been gambling with more money than he actually has. And the reason Bond is there is so Le Chiffre will lose all of his money, and essentially they will take Le Chiffre off the table for them, so they don't have to even get their hands dirty. All of this occurs, like I said, as Clarence is receiving his quote-unquote Baccarat lesson. Bond is drinking scotch, because I guess that's what Americans do. And we are also, during this introduction of Le Chiffre, we get to learn that he is, besides being an irresponsible gambler, also prepared to kill. He carries 3 different razor blades. One in his hat, I believe, one elsewhere in his body, and one near his ankle. And these are, quote unquote, for slashing purposes. And this is from the novel. Le Chiffre does carry these implements. It kind of comes back. It feels like color in this version of like, they're like, he's a dangerous guy. But anyways, we're also introduced to Valerie Mathis. This is the character of Vesper Lynd from the novels, but she's also a combo character of both Vesper Lynd and Renee Mathis, who is another agent that James Bond has a bit of a tete-a-tete with in the novel. And I love the way that she's introduced to it, because she literally walks into frame and is like, "Do you remember me?"
It's
subtle.
just so abrupt. There's
Yeah.
no transition. I feel like I'm just ragging on this, but I have to give it some grace. It was early TV, but man, a music cue. Music would
Something.
do so much right
Yeah.
now. There's no, like, in Casablanca, it's Bogart and Bergman. They see each other in the room. They interact. There's like a tension there. That's
Right.
kind of what you need from this. 2 people who did not expect to see each other in the same place, but have a history. You kind of want that romantic tension, and there's none of that.
No. And it's fascinating. That's actually a really good comparison, because that's sort of what you would think traditionally, that there would be some sort of, like, there's not even like a hint that he does recognize her, even though he's playing coy and kind of like, "Oh yeah, I truly remember you." Like, but it's not, it's like blank wall when it comes to him.
Yeah, and when the center character, like, I guess for this purpose, I'm just like, he's not giving any of these performers anything to do. And I feel really bad, because I feel like Valerie Mathis, she'd probably be interesting if she was given anything to work off of. Peter Lorre, innocent. He's
Yes,
the only
yeah.
person who made me like tickle or giggle about anything. But yeah, it was just very abrupt. Everything happening, and it just felt like they were looking at a map, and they did not deviate in any way.
So you learn pretty quickly that Valerie Mathis is quote unquote an agent of Lashif. She's with Lashif in one way, shape, or form or another. But she does go back to Jimmy Bond's room with him. He goes up, turns up the music immediately because he knows that the room is bugged. This is one of the only time you actually get music in the episode, and it's not for scenic purposes. It's just to loudly play as they talk to each other. They kiss, but then they both make sure that they turn towards the camera to deliver their lines. Bond reveals he knows that Valerie's working for Lashif. She says she doesn't know about the room being bugged, and he's like, whatever, just say your lines as you're supposed to say them. He turns the music down, and she warns him not to play against Lashif and that she knows he's a spy. Bum, bum, bum. So I guess that's supposed to be a great shock.
I mean, that's Act 1.
Yeah.
Getting all of our conflict in early, I guess.
It's funny. I think what's so interesting is that there's so much focus on the fact that, like, Bond and Valerie are in love, and it feels like they've spent no time to, once again, partially because they have no chemistry, but also for their backstory, it feels like they had like a fling at most.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, and it was like a question mark at the end, just the tone of your voice. Because, again, he is girl, give me nothing.
Right.
And all of this, you would have no idea that he's ever seen a woman before.
and that's what, like, yeah, that it's, you don't get that they're like the love of each other's lives, but they're acting like, oh my God, everything. And I get that, like, you know, this is at most 55 minutes. It's a really tight, you got to hit those plot points. You got to hit them hard. You got to hit them quick. But I think, like, with maybe some amount of chemistry built between them, it would have worked.
Yeah.
But as it is, like,
yeah, he's like seeing right through her. He's not focusing like in the moment in the scenes. It feels like he is trying to just remember his lines. I'm just like, this guy was in over his head. I feel bad for him. I guess rest in peace.
Yeah, whatever. You know, afterlife, it happens.
All right.
He will kill you.
Well, you've done your job well, Valerie. I hope he pays you well.
We're back with Clarence Leiter, who is maybe the most charming character out of all of this. He's one of Lashif's men attempts to rob him, essentially. We've also set up that Lashif has in his, like, sort of henchman type people, has what will be your very, very first James Bond gadget, which is an umbrella that is actually a gun. Did you think you'd be getting a quote-unquote gadget this early, and did you expect it not to be Bond's?
I am a little shocked it wasn't Bond's. It's like, it's trying to give Penguin from, like, Batman Returns. It's not really serving that, but I do like that we had some form of proper gadget in this, because it really did need to add some sort of style. I feel like had they had more props that they could have used and dazzled people with, it'd be a little more fun to watch. But yeah, this was, I was craving any sort of like style or substance, and that was like, ooh, that's fun. I want one of those.
It sort of lacks like stage magic, like every sort of bit of it, like, because it, like, each set is very much a set. It's all like three walls and the camera is one way. And even when you fill those sets, like especially the casino sets with people, it still has a very like, and we're cheating out to the audience quality about everything that they're doing. And I think had, you know, even, listen, I know we're many decades on now. We're almost a century later. Not quite, but, you know, we're edging towards 75 years later. And what we expect is very different than what people expected from television back then. But I still feel like there just needs to be a little more entertainment value than what we're given. But
I've watched a lot of TV from the 50s. They were able to give you entertainment value.
Yes.
You go back and watch like Betty White on a soundstage, just cracking up the whole time. And you're like, oh, there's something here. There's like a spark, there's a magic. And I think that's what this is lacking is the magic. It does just feel like a chapter in an anthology to where we just need to make content. This is the equivalent of making content.
Yes, yeah, you're very much correct. And I've seen other live productions from the 1950s that were aired on television that also like look so much more impressive and are written in such a more interesting way. But you're correct. It does just feel like content. But anyways, as I was saying, Clarence Leiter, they attempt to rob him of the 35,000 francs that he is supposed to. Is it 35,000? I wrote 35 million. Does that seem right? Am I?
Was it millions?
I
See,
feel
again,
like
I watched this twice yesterday. I should know.
Regardless, Leiter is attempting to give this money to Bond for him to gamble against Le Chiffre, and they do try and steal it from him, but he's a more competent spy. He hasn't actually picked up the money yet, and he's like, oh yeah, go deliver it to my table. And then he's literally saved by the bell. There is a bell alarm that goes off, and he's just kind of like, oh, I'll see you in there, sucker. Bond receives a phone call warning him that if he wins, Valerie will die, which I think is not a twist for most people. I mean, if she's already hanging out with the villain doesn't want Bond to win. It's, one goes into the other. Bond sits down to play Baccarat. He loses all of his money almost immediately because once again, we gotta speed that clip along. But he receives an extra 35,000 and or million francs. I know there's a big difference between those dollars, but I feel like
inflation's wild from the 50s. That's what we're going to blame this on.
Exactly. Of course, Bond wins in the second round, and Le Chiffre's henchmen end up threatening him as Le Chiffre kind of tucks his tail between his legs and leaves the table. We get the gun umbrella again, or gun cane, I guess. But he just sort of knocks it away. And I was like, oh, okay, like some actual danger, right? And he's just kind of like, eh.
Right.
He gives the gun cane to Clarence Leiter and says, you put this in Scotland Yard's Black Museum, which is maybe the most like interesting thing, or it's like, oh, Scotland Yard has like a museum of like evil, nefarious things. And I was like, I want to see that play. I'm more interested
That's
in
the
what's
Arkham Asylum we want to see.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote that at this point, all the characters are so flat. There's almost no suspense at all.
And like, these are very long, drawn out scenes. And for something that is only 50-ish minutes with credits, it should not feel this long. Like, I had to go lock my phone, like, away. I was, like, trying to pay attention so hard.
You're like, and what's happening on TikTok? Honestly, somebody could make a TikTok adaptation using this script that would maybe be better, I think, at this point.
Need some music, some sound effects. Maybe, they're going to have a brat girl summer. Let's let that happen. Let's let Peter Lorre have a brat girl summer because he's the only one giving anything.
I was going to say if someone needs to, it's certainly him. We're going to get to him. I want to talk to him about him after this, or after we finish up the plot description. Valerie is revealed herself to be a French secret agent. Gasp. And then knowing that, she also is a secret agent, Le Chiffre is able to get her and James Bond and tie them up in a room. Literally kind of just knocks James Bond down to the ground. It's pretty sad. So Le Chiffre tortures Bond in what is not really shown, and it's kind of funny. Like I actually did kind of like, it's one of the few like things that I was like, this makes sense to me, it being 1954. And knowing how I told you Le Chiffre tortures Bond in the book, which is literally beating his genitals with a carpet beater. I did think it was interesting that they managed to like maybe imply that that's what's going on, but not really. It's just sort of watching Barry Nelson scream a lot.
Yeah, like one of these, I have multiple plot descriptions pulled up to help me keep track of where I was. And I'm just like, wait, they're pulling his toenails out with pliers? What
yeah,
happened? And I'm like, I know they wouldn't be able to show this violence and stuff, but yeah, he's literally in a bathtub as all this is happening. So you really don't know what's going on.
Exactly. And to me, that was maybe like that. It was like, oh, what is happening? Um, but essentially, they tie Bond back up, they tie Valerie up, and Bond is able to escape, basically just through brute force. He beats up his guard in what is like one of the worst stagecraft fights I've ever seen at anything. Just kind of, he fires a gun and hits Lashif in the shoulder off camera. There's just
yes, it's all in a room off camera because
exactly.
I watched it happen. I'm like, oh yeah, they can't show this.
Right.
Somebody's shooting some blanks off in the room next door.
So Bond and Lashif literally wander to chairs and menacingly sit across from each other. Bond has Lashif at gunpoint.
Are you going to kill him, Jimmy?
Yes, why don't you, huh? Be fair, Mr. Bond. It's all in a game. We're both gamblers. And I've lost.
Jimmy.
Give me the check. Huh? Go on. Call the police. See how the game goes, huh? Interesting, huh?
But Lashif is able to get Valerie between them, and here comes Chekhov's razor blade. He pulls out a razor blade and uses her as a human shield. And luckily, Valerie, pulling the old James Bond cane gun trick, just kind of moves out of the way. And
right.
James Bond shoots Lashif, and then
like to the left, we're good. Bam.
Yeah, exactly. Just Valerie a little to the left. Bond and Valerie kiss. The music ramps up, and we are taken out of Casino Royale, left with more questions than answers, wanting no answers to those questions. Yeah, I asked for your initial reaction up front. I guess we sort of talked all the way through it about like what went wrong, but like, what do you? At what point do you think everybody knew they were wrong? Like, because I just can't imagine going through all of this and like I get that somebody like Peter Lorre, who has immense screen presence, like clearly is just doing this because he's getting a paycheck, but everybody else, I feel like, was early enough in their career or had to have some idea that like they were doing it for more than that. And everything is so flat.
Yeah. That's all I can say is it's just so flat. I'm like, did everybody just need a check that week? That's what's going on? Because it does feel like fill in the blank content. And like, I don't want to disparage just like the art of what this TV show like climaxes, the anthology installments, because again, we still have that with like think Black Mirror, everything's a new episode every time.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
And there are some of these that are good. Ida Lupino has one of these. You can go watch on YouTube. It's a lot more fun than this one. But this really just feels like they were trying to adapt anything at the time. But I think whenever you take away so many of the details, because I imagine the book had way more going on,
yes,
that you're just kind of left with nothing to work with. And you're so restrained by what you actually can do with the medium. Like, if you have to make this live, like, there are ways to make it good, but also I don't think it's gonna work, especially with most of these actors.
And here's the thing. I think, if we are talking like bare bones accuracy, I think this like hits a lot of the like plot points, the Cliff's Notes version of Casino Royale. With obviously the minor changes of making Felix the British agent and James Bond the American agent, and making Valerie sort of a combo character, Vesper, and Mathis. Outside of those like minor cosmetic changes of like these characters, it gets the like very, very basic plot. But I think in taking out like all of the action, all of the suspense, all of the like romance by making James Bond this kind of very flat, because one of the things that's great about James Bond in the novels is he's such a specific character and he's kind of unlikable, but I think Barry Nelson's unlikable for a different reason than what the James Bond character is in the novels. Yeah, it's so wild to me that they would miss the mark so much and yet still maintain the essence, you know? I guess it's like, like when you spray Febreze and it like quote unquote takes the smell out, but really it's just like Febreze smell on top of whatever the rotten smell is. Mm-hmm. It's that, it gets the essence floating over it, but the rest of it's kind of gross still.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a bit about, one of the things that we decided on when we were talking about the shows. We wanted to talk about gadgets, we want to talk about Bond girls, we want to talk about villains, and then obviously we want to talk about the queer nature of things. There's not a lot of that to talk about here. We've already talked about the gadget. I mean, the name of the show is the Q Division, which is where the gadgets come from in the later films. But I would like to talk about Valerie real quick, and then I would especially like to talk about Peter Lorre's Le Chiffre. Valerie, I don't have too much to say about because she's given nothing. But do you think that since they decided to combine her character with another secret agent, that they've somehow managed to even give her less to do than, once again, you don't have a frame of reference for this. You've never seen the other full-on Casino Royales, but it feels like by being like, oh, we have this really interesting James Bond female character from the novels, and we have this other really interesting agent character, yet somehow we can't make them work as one character. I mean, and maybe that's just a too much of a big thing question, but like, what are your thoughts about Valerie Mathis? Like, what is she there to do?
She's there to be the woman in something, and that's something that we still deal with in a lot of films today. Oh, you gotta have a woman. She's probably the love interest. She's not gonna have much to do. But I think whenever you're trying to smush together two characters and you only have a bare minimum amount of time, none of it's gonna gel because she's essentially there to be kind of a damsel, kind of like give him the cigarette case to get the razor blade out, and that's it. Like, she's there to be like the hostage, the person to be saved. Like, we're told she's an agent. That has no bearing on the plot. Like, you could take out her being a French agent and it has nothing to do with it. Like, it doesn't change the story.
That's sort of what I don't understand by making her a composite character with Mathis, because I guess it's giving her a reason to exist in the realm of Le Chiffre as to like why she would be amongst his like cadre of henchmen, his like entourage of all men, basically. And also, she doesn't seem to be having a sexual or romantic relationship with Le Chiffre. She's just kind of hanging out.
You see, Valerie, we have a microphone in Bond's room. You were once so close to him. I just wanted to make sure about your present feelings. Oh, but you came through magnificently. Any suspicions I might have had were quite unfounded.
I did all you asked.
Admirably. Perhaps even a little more.
Yeah, like, we don't know anything about what her mission actually is because it just seems like she's colliding in on this other person's. And it's like, is she like the person that is supposed to be like seducing him to get information, which is another thing you would expect from a character like this, especially an agent? Or what's going on with her? What's the point? And I think there is no point.
And even I thought to myself, like, it's very clear going in that Le Chiffre knew James Bond as an agent. He knew this agent was coming after him. And so I thought perhaps maybe he knew this woman had this previous relationship with James Bond, and that way he could use that to his advantage. But it almost feels, because we're not given any sort of backstory, we're not given any sort of idea as to who she is or her connection to Lashif, like, it just seems coincidental. It seems like happenstance that he had spent a summer with her previously, and then, you know, Lashif's like, oh, great, like, you're here. I guess I can send you to seduce him. But also, it doesn't seem like her bit is to seduce him either, because when she comes back to Lashif's room after she's been with James Bond, and she's basically delivered the message that, like, he knows you're a spy, don't win. Lashif's like, I had to, test your loyalty. And it's like, okay, well then, so it wasn't even about seducing James Bond. It was just, like, Lashif could have threatened him himself. I don't.
Yeah. I feel like it's just like the formula of it all is already there, because again, if there is a Bond girl in every book, I'm assuming that people, had they read the book, they probably want a character like that there. I imagine they just threw together the two names because they liked the names slightly different. That's what I'm feeling, because I don't think they're taking anything from a character. And I feel bad for the actress, because I imagine she could probably do something if given it. She actually said her lines and didn't stumble over them every single time.
I was going to say, like, I didn't actually mind her. Linda Christian.
Yeah.
And I thought she was both beautiful. She had some presence. Unfortunately, she was acting opposite, a stick of wood. Oh. But, like, I've seen people give better performances. I've seen better performances from the proverbial, like, tennis ball on a stick than I saw from Barry Nelson. All right, then I want to move on to Lashif. Peter Lorre, very famous actor at this point, certainly the most famous member of this cast.
Oh, the light of my life. I took a picture of him with his little gun. I love him.
He's so good. I don't really know what to make of Lashif in terms of, like, Lashif as a character is perhaps not necessarily like a queer-coded character in the novels. I do want to just mention real quick, like, a brief sort of description of him that's given in Casino Royale. This is in Ian Fleming's own words. And just to mention again, like we mentioned last week, Ian Fleming writes in a very sort of reporterly manner, which is sort of what makes his writing so accessible for most people. He writes like a journalist. So these are very short sentences. They're very clipped. About Lashif, he says, height 1.73 m, weight 114.3 kg, complexion very pale, clean shaven, hair red brown, ambrose, eyes very dark brown with white showing all around, iris, small, rather feminine mouth, false teeth of expensive quality, ears small with large lobes, indicating some Jewish blood. Great, Ian, thanks. Hands small, well tended, hirsute, feet small. Racially, subject is a mixture of Mediterranean with Prussian or Polish strains. Dresses well and meticulously, generally in dark double-breasted suits. Smokes incessantly. He does go on to say that his voice is soft and even, bilingual in French and English, good German, traces of Marseille accent, smiles infrequently, does not laugh, habits, mostly expensive, but discreet, large sexual appetites, flagellant, expert driver of fast cars. I love that he feels the need to put in that he's, like, into whipping and into, like, whipping himself. Flagellant, large sexual appetites. I do also want to bring up, there is a large history of queer coding villains, and a lot of that comes from, especially in the earlier parts of the 20th century, Hollywood had a Hays Code that wouldn't allow them to show certain things on screen. So if you were to present a queer or a homosexual character, they had to be a villain. And so you get a lot of queer coding in villains. I think what's interesting in this version of Casino Royale, Peter Lorre very famously does play a gay character in The Maltese Falcon, which I found like a not so contemporary review that mentions this at one point, that he's like coded as a homosexual, but it's great because he doesn't show off any homosexual tendencies. I was like, okay. But I think what Peter Lorre is doing here is, and perhaps I'm reading too much into it, is because he doesn't have a ton to play with, and because he's clearly has no chemistry with Valerie, he's playing his like tit for tat with James Bond almost as like, I'm gonna generate some chemistry with you, and like, you're clearly the object of my desire in this point in time because you're the person who can stop me. How did you feel about Peter Lorre's portrayal of Le Chiffre?
I could definitely see some queer elements because he gave me little freak energy, and that's usually what queer is back then.
Yes, absolutely.
But I kind of love it. Also, side note, it is 35 million francs. I just found it in my little notes here.
Thank you. Okay, I had it in my notes. I just didn't trust myself. So
I'll take that money, by the way, if anybody wants
Yeah.
to give it to me. I'll share it with the little freak. I love Peter Lorre.
I'll share it with the little freak.
I love him. He
I
gave
do
me
lo-
something.
I do love him. And like, I do think this portrayal is sort of fascinating because obviously there's a sinisterness in it because that's what he's there to provide. But I like that he's the most, even outside of his lines, even just in his like movements and whatnot, it seems to be obsessed with Bond. It seems to be like, okay, like, let's play cards, and like he's like generating the most amount of romance.
Exactly. Like he's the one person actually playing and not just responding to lines with his next line. He's giving you character. You can see him paying attention. Even though his scene partners are fumbling lines, he's the one like really giving you something, being interesting, giving you a look. And I'm just like, he deserves so much more. He deserved a real movie, a better movie, get to be a villain. Because also, we've seen him like in classic films be a like dirtbag villain, and he's so good at it. So I'm just thankful he was in this movie to give me something to hold on to. I support him. Be gay, do crime.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, as you most certainly know, Mr. Bond, no secret agent can ever be quite sure when another agent isn't working for the other side. Although I always thought that mutual love means mutual trust.
Do you love me, Jimmy?
He is much too sensible to answer that. In any case, neither of you wants the other to be hurt, huh?
I do want to say that I also did put in my notes, though. I wrote Peter Lorre is best while torturing Bond, and then I put is this villain queer coded? Then I also wrote, is it somehow completely sexless as well, too, though? Because even though he does seem infatuated with Bond, it doesn't necessarily feel like he has Bond tied up. He could do whatever he wants, like, and he's a bad guy, but he's just kind of like, like, whatever, like, this is part of the game, like, I tie you up, I torture you, like, that's it, like, and so I also found that like really interesting because there were bits where he felt really queer coded, and there were bits that were just like, but maybe it's, in the end, it's truly just not that deep.
It's probably not that deep. I probably want it to be more queer coded than it actually is. But again, I feel like with a different Bond in the role, maybe we would get that tension more. Because again, Peter Lorre's giving you something. And like, I'm going to call him like D-list Chris Pratt is giving you nothing.
He does have a Chris Pratt quality to him.
It's
Ugh.
a Chris Pratt sexless, energyless quality. Like, there's no sauce on this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a very funny apocrypha myth that during the original broadcast, many people saw Le Chiffre, Peter Lorre's character, after getting shot and dying, getting up and leaving the scene of the show because it was live, and there wouldn't be a time for him to do that. Unfortunately, this is not true because the only version of this that survives is the version that we have, and it's clearly not seen. It's that doesn't happen, so it's not possible that it necessarily happened. However, this did actually happen on one of these episodes of Climax. So it's not necessarily that people were lying about it. They did see it on an episode of Climax. They were just misremembering. It was actor Tristram Coffin, who's lying under a blanket, and Detective Dick Powell was talking about having the body removed when the actor rose from the dead and strolled off the scene. Powell and the other actors went right on talking as if nothing had happened, and the show went on, and the private eye finally solved the murder, leaving televiewers a little perplexed. CBS blushingly explained yesterday that Coffin thought the scene was over and that he was off camera when he took his macabre stroll. So yes, this is an adaptation of The Long Goodbye, which is the famous Raymond Chandler novel. It was also an hour-long live adaptation. I almost wish it was this, just to add a little spice to the proceedings.
We needed some spice going on here. Instead, we have our whole Sinbad collective delusion where we think we remember something, but turns out literally everybody's wrong.
Absolutely. I do also want to point out Barry Nelson maybe in the end kind of knew that he was not the right choice for this. And obviously he had no clue, as no one did, that this was going to blow up, that, you know, James Bond was going to become a huge thing. And he was interviewed in 1987 by Entertainment Tonight about James Bond. And he essentially said, like...
Well, I was doing a series for CBS called My Favorite Husband, and they seemed to get in a jam on casting it. I was down in Jamaica at the time, and they gave me a hurried call, and I came up. I had not read the book, and the Bond thing wasn't all that well known, and I did the best I could, very modestly. I just called myself 001.5.
So I think he kind of knew that, you know, he fucked up a little.
Knew. He didn't read a book. What are books? He can't read back then.
Exactly. But I do think this is a fascinating early entry into the James Bond thing, even though basically nothing you have seen here will reflect into the Eon series, which is sort of what people know and love of James Bond on the big screen. But I am glad that you took time to sit down and watch this with me, Chels, because somebody else had to see it. Somebody else had to know about it.
We're the only two people who have seen this, even though it's available.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know how that's possible, but it's truly just us. But do you have any final thoughts about this version of Casino Royale, other than that you wish you could probably get your 55 minutes back?
Oh my gosh, I am just thinking about how they wanted it to be the TV show, like Mystery of the Week type thing. And, like, on paper, it should work because, like, I've seen the old Mission Impossible. I've seen the Mission Impossible reboot because a Days of Our Lives actor was in it. But on paper, this should work. The problem is all of those shows, like Fugitive and, like, Have Gun, Will Travel, everybody looked like the TV version of Clark Gable and had chemistry with everybody. And this guy looks like my neighbor.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it's every bit of it is sort of wrong. Every bit is like there's not enough chemistry between the characters. No one looks quite right. It's all very plain and kind of muddy, and not just because it is a kinescope copy. Because I think even if we could see it in color, I don't feel like we would necessarily be impressed.
There's a colorization on YouTube, and I tried to watch it the second time, and I looked, I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It looks very bad.
Yeah.
But I don't think color would have helped this because it is just awkward staging, the blocking. Like, I know most of it's in wide shot because it's a televised play, essentially, but... Again, I watch soap operas. You can do one or two close-ups and just add like a little bit of romantic music and it'll do all the work for you. But this doesn't have any of the bells and whistles.
And even when there are close-ups, which, like you said, they're pretty few and far between, you know, Nelson himself looks very confused. He doesn't, you know, you got to learn those lines before you get on stage, buddy. You got to, like...
Yeah. And he's not very suave or smooth, and even the lines that could be good, because again, you like there's this thing in soap operas, the shit to sugar, because a lot of soap operas can be very bad sometimes, but if you put the right actor in it, I know, the gasp. But a lot of actors can turn shit into sugar and you just believe it. This guy doesn't have that. Like,
Right.
you can watch Kim Zimmer from Guiding Light. She is the queen of shit to sugar because she played a cloned version of herself. She is like jumping out of airplanes. She doing all the wild stuff. But you believe her because she can sell you the most ridiculous things. Like a good actor can sell you nonsense. And this guy,
Yeah.
he couldn't sell me like a piece of toast.
Yeah, he's just all wrong. It's literally just it's the worst of all worlds, unfortunately. And I mean, it's lucky that they get it out of their system pretty early
Right.
on. But man, oh man, I mean, he really should have waited for a bigger paycheck. He really should have. I mean, this whole thing causes whole like bits of the rights not being under the same rights as the rest of the James Bond movies for years and years, and we'll get to that when it comes time to talk about that. But yeah, all in all, it just doesn't quite ever work very well. But yeah, I think that's case closed on the original
Case closed.
1950. Absolutely. I think we've talked about it enough. We're going to file that back into the files. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us. If you want to contact us, you can always find us online at QDivisionPod. On Twitter, you can always email us at qdivisionpod@gmail.com. And you can always find us on Instagram at QDivisionPod. I just tried to streamline the names across all formats.
Synergy.
Synergy, exactly. And we will be back next month, finally diving into the first Eon film production, a little movie called Dr. No.
A real movie.
Until next time, agents, hopefully we've left you shaken and not stirred.